The seatbelt clicked once and stayed that way. I rested my hands on my thighs and kept my eyes forward. Boarding finished in uneven waves, shoulders brushing past, bags lifted, voices lowering as people found the places the system had already decided for them. Seat 1A was not a reward. It was a window, a narrow ledge, a line of light cutting across the armrest. I chose it because it allowed sleep, nothing else. Bradley Knox stopped beside me without asking. He did not look down at the seat number. He did not check his phone. He placed his elbow on the armrest, as if the object itself recognized him. This seat always clears itself. His tone carried no challenge. It assumed completion. I did not answer. I looked once at the window, then at the seatback screen still frozen on the boarding graphic. My boarding pass stayed inside my jacket pocket. I did not reach for it. Bradley waited half a second longer than necessary, then stepped back. He exhaled through his nose and glanced toward the galley, already disengaging. The matter, to him, had moved on. Karen Doyle approached a moment later. Her shoes stopped exactly at the edge of my footwell. She did not greet me by name, though it was printed clearly on the manifest she carried folded against her forearm. "Sir," she said, "there seems to be a small upgrade glitch." Her voice was light. Administrative. She held a reprint slip between two fingers, blank side facing me. "Sometimes the system assigns seats before it finishes syncing," Karen continued. "I can reissue your pass and get you something comfortable further back." Further back remained undefined. Comfortable was left open. "I'm already seated," I said. Karen tilted her head slightly, recalculating. Behind her, Bradley Knox stood with his arms crossed, eyes roaming the cabin rather than settling on me, as if this were an internal correction, not a disagreement. "Mr. Knox is one of our long-standing guests," Karen said. "We prioritize those relationships when these things happen." Her fingernail tapped the edge of the paper once. No tablet lit up. No seat map changed. "I paid for this seat," I said. "I'm not moving." Karen's expression adjusted, not offended, not surprised. Adjusted. "You're making people uncomfortable," she replied. "And we need cooperation before departure." Movement around us slowed. A woman in the row behind lowered her phone from eye level to her lap. Across the aisle, a man stopped typing mid-sentence, the cursor blinking on an unfinished email. The air temperature did not change, but the cadence did. An announcement paused mid-script. A service cart sat unattended in the galley, one wheel angled slightly out of line. Bradley leaned toward Karen and spoke quietly, though not quietly enough. "I have sensitive work," he said. "I need the window." Karen nodded once. She turned back to me without checking anything. "If you refuse," she said, "we'll have to escalate this." I looked at her badge, then at the blank reprint slip. "Escalate how?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. She straightened, stepped half a pace back, and let the silence perform its function. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Lower, firmer. "I'll treat this as non-compliance." The word arrived without an action attached. "Not yet." Karen turned toward the cockpit and walked away. Bradley Knox smiled. It was brief, almost private, the kind meant for people who already understood how outcomes were shaped. I remained seated. My posture did not change. The seatbelt stayed fastened. Two uniformed officers appeared at the front of the cabin several minutes later. One paused near the bulkhead, scanning faces. The other officer, Jake Lawson, stepped closer, his attention settling on me without explanation. "Sir," Lawson said, "what seems to be the issue?" Before I could answer, Karen Doyle spoke from behind him. "He's refusing a lawful instruction," she said. "He's making people uneasy." Lawson nodded once, already shifting his weight. "You'll need to gather your things," he said. "We'll sort it out outside." "I'd like you to verify my ticket first," I replied. Lawson looked at me, then past me, measuring time rather than facts. "You don't look like you're in a rush," he said. His hand touched my arm. Not a shove. A test. That was the moment the system crossed itself. Officer Jake Lawson's hand remained on my arm a second longer than necessary. Not pressure, not force. A pause that tested whether the system would object. It did not. Karen Doyle stood just behind him, close enough that her shadow crossed the edge of my seat. She said nothing now. Her role had shifted from instruction to confirmation. Lawson gestured toward the aisle. I did not move. My seatbelt stayed fastened. The click from earlier had not been reversed. Behind us, the cabin held its breath in fragments. A man in the second row angled his knees inward, creating space that had not been requested. Another slid his phone fully into his jacket pocket, screen dark, as if the record had already been taken. Sergeant Michael Torres entered from the front. He was older, heavier in posture, his presence less hurried. He took in the scene without asking questions, eyes moving from Karen to Lawson to me, then to the empty space where Bradley Knox should have been standing. Bradley had already sat down, seat 1B, Isle. He leaned away from me, body turned outward, as though proximity itself carried liability. Karen spoke first. He refused to comply, she said. He's escalating. Torres nodded once. The way people do when they have already decided which version will require less paperwork. Sir, he said, looking at me now, we're going to step off the aircraft and sort this out. I asked him to verify my ticket. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Karen. Is this necessary? He asked. She met his eyes and nodded. Not emphatically. Enough. Torres exhaled slowly. All right, he said. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. The words were neutral. The direction was not. Lawson reached again, this time with intent. His fingers closed around my forearm. The cabin reacted in small ways. A woman 2 rows back shifted her bag from the aisle to the window, clearing a path no one had asked her to clear. Someone near the bulkhead leaned sideways, creating an angle for a better view without lifting a device. I stood when they pulled. Not to resist. To prevent impact. The seatbelt unlatched itself with a sound that landed harder than it should have. Torres moved closer as Lawson guided me forward. Karen stepped aside, allowing the line to form the way lines always form, authority in front, compliance behind, witnesses pressed into silence. At the galley wall, Lawson stopped me and turned me slightly. Not fully, enough to claim control. This is temporary, Torres said. We'll verify everything once we're off. The word once carried weight. It meant not now. Bradley Knox watched from his seat. His phone was no longer raised. It rested face down on his thigh, as if recording were no longer necessary. Karen adjusted her jacket. The fabric smoothed where it had wrinkled earlier. Lawson reached for the cuffs. Metal moved. Sound followed. The first cuff closed around my left wrist. Tight. I did not pull away. I did not speak. Torres hesitated. Check his pocket, he said, quieter now. Lawson reached inside my jacket without asking. His hand brushed leather. The cabin shifted again. One man leaned back, creating distance. Another leaned forward, unable to stop himself. Lawson pulled the wallet free and opened it with the same expectation he had carried from the start. The light caught the badge before he finished unfolding it. The reaction was immediate. Not loud, not verbal. Lawson froze. His grip loosened without instruction. Torres stepped closer, eyes narrowing, as he focused on the wallet now held between them. He did not take it. He did not touch it. He saw enough. Uncuff him, Torres said. The command landed cleanly. Lawson fumbled for the key. It slipped once, hit the galley floor, and spun before stopping. Karen took a step back. Not far. Just enough. Bradley Knox's phone slid from his thigh and hit the carpet. The sound was sharp. No one moved to retrieve it. The second cuff never closed. Torres turned toward Karen, then toward the cockpit. Captain needs to be notified, he said. I rolled my wrist once as the cuff came free. The mark was already visible. I did not look at the cabin. I did not look at Bradley. I took the wallet back and placed it inside my jacket. The system had corrected itself. Late, but decisively, Torres stepped aside, clearing the aisle without ceremony. I walked forward, not escorted, not stopped. Behind me, the cabin remained still, waiting for the next instruction that would not come from me. The captain did not speak at first. He stood at the cockpit threshold, eyes moving from the open galley to the wallet now back inside my jacket. No announcement followed, no apology, only a pause long enough for the procedure to surface. Hold the cabin, he said to no one in particular. The words were operational. They changed the order of things. A tablet appeared in his hands. The manifest refreshed. Seat assignment stabilized without comment. Karen Doyle was asked to step forward, not escorted, removed from sequence. She complied without argument, posture straight, hands visible. The authority she had borrowed already returned to the system. Her access badge was clipped off her jacket and set on the counter. No speech, no defense. The object did the work. Bradley Knox remained seated in 1B. The aisle seat. He did not stand when the captain looked his way. "Sir," the captain said, "I'll need you to remain where you are." Knox nodded too quickly. His phone stayed on the floor. The captain turned back to me. "Thank you for your patience," he said. It was the only acknowledgement offered. It was sufficient. The Port Authority was notified through the cockpit line. Not urgently, accurately. A supervisor arrived at the aircraft door with a clipboard and a radio. Questions were asked in a lower register, away from the cabin. Names were confirmed. Times were logged. No one asked me to explain anything. Bradley Knox was asked to stand. He did. His jacket caught on the armrest as he rose. The supervisor pointed toward the door. Knox looked once at the captain, then at me, searching for a reaction that did not come. He walked off the aircraft without a word. Karen Doyle followed a moment later. Her shoes sounded different on the jet bridge, the rhythm altered by the absence of uniformity. The aisle cleared. The captain waited until both were gone, then addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your cooperation," he said. "We'll be departing shortly." No explanation was offered. None was required. I returned to seat 1A. The seatbelt clicked once and stayed that way. A replacement attendant took the forward position. Younger, careful. She did not use my name. "Can I get you anything?" she asked. "Black coffee," I said. She nodded and moved away. The door closed. The aircraft pushed back. The cart in the galley was realigned. The system resumed its intended rhythm. At the cruise, a notification appeared on my phone. A short message from an internal contact. Subject line only. Nobody. Status updated. Proceed. I locked the screen and put the phone away. The cabin remained quiet for the rest of the flight. No one approached. No one asked questions. When we landed, I stood when the seatbelt sign released. I retrieved my bag and stepped into the aisle without looking back. The jet bridge swallowed the noise behind me. At the terminal, 2 men waited near the gate. They did not wear uniforms. They fell into step without greeting. We walked past the monitors, past the coffee line, past the people still discussing what they had seen without knowing what it meant. Outside, a car idled. The door opened. He got in. The aircraft departed without delay. The rest happened through paperwork. Statements. Reviews. Outcomes attached to names, not faces. I was not present for any of it. If you're still watching, drop a comment with what you noticed shift first, the words, the hands, or the silence. Share this story with someone who understands how systems really work. And subscribe to Black CEO Tales for more stories where power doesn't announce itself, it just moves.